Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the new Brass Gaming. I'm your host, Christian. Alongside me virtually is...
Aspen.
And yeah, there's going to be a little bit of a delay, so we want to apologize ahead of time. There's a little bit of lag
Oh yeah.
between me talking and Espen responding, so just imagine like you're watching the news and we're a couple news anchors doing this thing, I guess. I don't know. I don't know where I was going with that. I lost my train of thought.
It's okay. It works.
But besides that, welcome to our first deck tech. This is going to be a Brass Brewing with no budget on Kathril Aspect Warder. And so, to get right into it, let's talk about Kathril Aspect Warder. Kathril is two colorless, white, black, and green. He's a 3/3. He reads, when Kathril Aspect Warper enters the battlefield, put a flying counter on any creature you control if a creature card in your graveyard has flying. Repeat this process for First Strike, Double Strike, Death Touch, Hexproof, Indestructible, Lifelink, Menace, Reach, Trample, and Vigilance. Then, put a +1/+1 counter on Kathril for each counter put on a creature this way. So, wow. He's got a lot of text for a commander card, a legendary creature. So, what do we know about him? Well, we know that this is going to be a graveyard-centric themed deck. And in particular, my build of Kathril is very all-out go for the graveyard. And so, just want to say that the deck list of Kathrils will be in the description box below. It'll be card for card what I have built at the time of this recording. So also, before we move on, I want to encourage you guys to like, share, subscribe, and comment. So, Espen, I know we haven't played a lot with this deck, since you've been way across the state. But let's talk a little bit about power level like we always do. So after seeing the deck list and after looking at the cards that we have that we're going to highlight, where would you rank this deck?
I'd definitely say that Kathril is on a scale from 7 or maybe an 8. Definitely not a 9 or 10. Only because it is based on a graveyard, and as you said, you're a all-in deck. You're throwing all your special keyword monsters into the graveyard. You are just trying to just go hard, go fast, and punch hard as fast as possible. So you're filling up your graveyard. And I think we talked about this earlier too before this, but you mentioned that there's no protection for graveyard hate, which definitely bumps it down to more like of a 7 level. But nonetheless, Kathril is just crazy awesome, especially if you get some of those cards that is keyword.card, because we know there are some of those. We'll cover those later on, but it's definitely a powerful deck.
So the biggest thing about this Kathril deck is it really reflects my playstyle of Commander, where I like to go all in. And so with the right start, this deck is extremely explosive. You only need about a turn or two to set up. Like, a turn is probably good enough to get a couple relevant creatures in your graveyard. And then once you resolve Kathril and his ability goes on the stack, it's beautiful. Like you now have this huge beater with a ton of keywords. And I think it's a fair criticism. This deck has a huge lack of protection from graveyard hate. And again, this is just my list right now. Think of this as the alpha list. This is the list that I built on the fly. And I wanted to go all in and see how an all-in strategy would go. Our play group really plays a lack of like graveyard hate, except for recently, since I was playing this deck on a website that wasn't Moto, and I was doing some testing, and a lot of people didn't play a lot of graveyard hate. And so I didn't adapt the deck for metas with a whole lot of graveyard hate. But I think it's a totally fair criticism to say, hey, look, your Kathril deck is missing those certain graveyard hate cards, those artifact or enchantment destruction, and that's fair. But I've had a fair bit of success with this build as is, and once my playgroup adapts to the deck, I can just adapt further and take some cards and reconfigure. But as of right now, this build is pretty solid. Its high point is an 8. And the reason we say the high point's an 8 because if you have the crazy start, you're probably just going to win the game. I mean, this deck is absolutely nuts. And so we did talk about this in the welcome back to the channel episode, but we wanted to say, hey, just so you know, we'll say this in every episode we do a deck tech. We don't talk about every single card. The reason we don't do it is mainly logistical issues of editing and stuff like that. But we do like to highlight what we think are the important or the interesting cards within the deck. Espen, you want to talk a little bit more about that? Like, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah. So what we do for that, how we choose them, we have a discussion. We talk about the deck. We talk about some cards and different fields and some different categories of the deck and what is most important to gameplay. And we look at this through a couple games. We evaluate, okay, this card seemed to be important here and for this reason, for that reason. And though I myself have not played it, so from Christian's input and me looking through the list, we kind of went through and we're like, okay, we should definitely highlight these cards and highlight these categories because all the categories overall really help with the game plan of winning the game.
Yeah, and a lot of patterns emerge when you play Commander deck enough that you can kind of identify, well, these pieces are the most impactful pieces of the deck. And with a deck like this, you're playing an X number of creatures that, yes, super powerful, and we'll get to those when we talk about the keyword and the non-keyword creatures. Yes, they're super powerful, but a lot of them cost about 1 billion mana each to cast. You know, they're very expensive mana cost-wise, which is why you want to dump them in your graveyard with some cards, and you want to take advantage of the keywords that they have to offer. So, without further ado, I think we should move on to the to talking about the deck. And we just want to mention again, even though I just mentioned it, the deck list will be in the description box alone. It'll be a tapped out link. So, without further ado, we'll go ahead and start talking about it. So, this first section I titled Fill Your Graveyard. And why did I do that? Well, these are cards that are vital to getting that important piece or getting multiple pieces into your graveyard. So first I want to start with Entomb. And because of this nice overlay, we have a spot to put the cards, which is, actually I'm pointing the wrong way, which is right over here. So just be on the lookout right there for the cards. You're pointing the wrong way. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So I wanted to highlight 3 different type of cards that fills your graveyard. The first is an instant, and this is Entomb. So what is Entomb? Entomb is a 1 black instant that reads, search your library for a card, put that card in your graveyard, then shuffle your library. Overall, just a sweet card. It grabs you whatever piece that you want in your graveyard right away. And with all the keyword soup in these creatures, you have a lot of options to choose from. So the next card I wanted to talk about is a creature that I'm sure is a staple in pretty much any graveyard strategy, and that's Hermit Druid. He's 1 colorless and a green for a 1/1. He has an activated ability, green and tap. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a basic land card. Put that card into your hand and put all other revealed cards into your graveyard. So this card is sweet. Now in the current list that I have more basics than I like, but that's being adjusted as we speak. So the list that it'll see up is the final list that I have for the alpha list per se. Hermit Druid overall, I mean, he's a staple in graveyard decks for a reason. And sometimes he's good when you have that turn 2, you play him. Turn 3, oh, you miss a land drop, just activate him and you're guaranteed a basic. Because as long as your deck has a basic in it, you're guaranteed a basic. So you're going to hit a land drop. Just overall, Hermit Druid is a sweet, sweet card. Now, this is the card I think that we'll have a little bit of discussion on. This card's in the deck for testing purposes, and because I overall think it's a sweet enchantment. And this is Death's Oasis. For a colorless, a black, and a green, it's an enchantment. It reads, whenever a non-token creature you control dies, put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. Then, return a creature card with lesser converted mana cost from that creature that died from your graveyard to your hand. Then it also has 1, sacrifice Death's Oasis. You gain life equal to the greatest converted mana cost among creatures you control. So, this card is super sweet. It's super sweet because it gives you that synergy to start milling your deck. And one thing I've noticed with this deck is you're running a lot of dorks. So like you resolve this, eventually someone's gonna get rid of your Hermit Druid or your other small creatures. So a good way to take advantage of them is they die, throw a couple cards in the graveyard. And what's nice is most of the time you don't have to worry about returning a card because most of the relevant keyworded permanents or creatures for this instance, they are huge CMC. So you won't be forced if your Hermit Druid dies to return something big from your graveyard to your hand. You're just filling your graveyard with more creatures. Do you have anything you want to mention with this card, Espen?
It's a great new card, and I love it. I haven't, at this time of recording, I try to not look at much of Ikoria because I want to buy a box and see all the cool things that are in it. But looking at it now, it looks really cool and super powerful as well, just to like keep on churning through your deck. Like someone has a pseudo edge engine, or when they do die, like your deck is not about having a bunch of death, it's about filling your graveyard, which I think is just an added perk. If something dies, you get to fill your graveyard, which is great. And if you need to gain some life, it does that too.
Overall, this card is super sweet. Like, just a good overall card. And so, let's move on to the next section. This one we called Keywords Matter. And so, Espen, I figured you like big creatures and you like creatures that have a lot of stuff they can do. So go ahead, you take this section away.
So the first card I would like to cover in this deck is Sigarda, Host of Herons. For 2 generic mana, green, white, white. It is a legendary creature angel. It has flying and hexproof, which is awesome. And it is a 5/5. And it says spells and abilities your opponents control can't cause you to sacrifice permanents. So when it's on the field, it's already good as is, especially if like someone plays like a Dictate of Erebos and try to get rid of everything. But it is a really cool card, and even in the graveyard, Hexproof is so important. That's probably one of the most important counters on here, because you want to keep your commander safe. So once you get a creature with Hexproof in it, oh, it just feels so good right then and there. And you could, once you hit in the bin and you cast your commander, then it gets Hexproof and flying. That's really awesome. Another card I want to cover is Kunoros, Hound of Athreos. For 1 generic mana, white, and a black. It is another legendary creature hound, and it has Vigilance, Menace, and Lifelink. And it says creature cards in graveyards can't enter the battlefield. And players can't cast spells from graveyards. So it's a Grafdigger's Cage in a body for 3/3 Vigilant, Menace, Lifelink, dude. And it's also another great thing to have in the graveyard, especially the Lifelink and the Menace. It helps to get through things, and Vigilance is also wonderful, especially if you get Indestructible. You can just attack for free, essentially, then you have a blocker back. So, and it feels really good. One of my favorite cards, though, some commander players don't like it, but it is Avacyn, Angel of Hope, for 5 generic mana, white, white, white. For another legendary creature, Angel, it has flying, vigilance, and indestructible. So in the graveyard, it's amazing. And it's an 8/8 body, and it also reads other permanents you control have indestructible. So when it's on the battlefield, I feel like we see its most worth. But even if it's in the graveyard, it gets one of your creatures indestructible when Kathril enters the battlefield. Yeah, and it's just a super cool card overall.
Avacyn is absolutely a great card for this deck. I mean, we already mentioned that the most important keyword is hexproof, at least in groups with a lot of removal like ours. Indestructible, and just her ability to give everything else indestructible is, oh god, so good. But I think my favorite card in the deck is this last card you're about to talk about.
Oh yeah, who could forget this card? The Great Zetalpa, Primal Dawn, 6 generic mana, white, white, for another legendary creature, Elder Dinosaur. Now, what does this thing not have? It has flying, it has double strike, vigilance, trample, and indestructible. And it's a 4/8. This thing is massive. It's a big, huge beater. And again, even if it's on the battlefield, it's just more juice for your Kathril when you have it on the battlefield. And when I first saw this card, I fell in love with it, even though it cost 1 billion mana to cast. It just looks super cool. And though I'm an old timer, well, not necessarily old timer, but I like Avacyn Angel of Hope. But I understand why you like this card. It's just insane.
In my playtesting, I found that, in particular, putting Zetalpa in your graveyard is probably one of the top things that you'll do. So Zetalpa overall is, I mean, he's just a good creature, and one of the targets for our card that we're going to talk about later. So, moving on, we just highlighted a bunch of keyword matters creatures. So what are some important non-keyword matters stuff? Well, I'll go over some of them. The first card is probably that's tough. This is probably one of my most favorite cards in the new set, and that's Luminous Broodmoth. So, what does this do? It's 2 generic, white, for a creature insect. It's a 3/4 body. It has flying. Whenever a creature you control without flying dies, return to the battlefield under its owner's control with a flying counter on it. So, I guess you could argue that this could be a keywords matter creature, but it only gives Kathril flying, but the upside is, now all of your stuff essentially has a second life, and it comes back with flying. I mean, Espa, is there anything you want to add about this card?
Just a wonderful card, and not just in this deck, even in other formats. It's a really sweet card, and I believe, if I'm not wrong, wasn't there a infinite combo or some weird combo that you can do with this?
There's some infinite combo. It's not in this deck, but I've seen it online. But yeah. So the next important card, and you'll see why this is important in a moment, is Shalai, Voice of Plenty. So sticking with the theme of Legendary Angels, she costs 3 colorless and a white. She's a 3/4. She has flying. However, the important part, she reads, you, planeswalkers you control, and other creatures you control have hexproof. Wow. She also has another ability that is actually surprisingly relevant sometimes. It's 4 colorless, green, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Now, why is Shalai important to this deck? Well, it's easy. The hexproof to you and to your other creatures is super important. And what's even super nice is if you have a hexproof creature in your graveyard, Kathril could just go ahead and throw a hexproof counter on her. Now, every creature you control and you has hexproof. I mean, what's nicer than having hexproof for everything? I mean, super strong ability, super strong.
Mm-hmm.
And so finally, probably my favorite little mana dork in this deck. And I know you haven't seen this card, Espen, but you probably won't even have much of a take because it's so simple of a card. So Skull Prophet.
I just pulled it up.
Oh, did you? So
Yeah.
Skull Prophet is a green and a black creature, human druid. He's a 3/1. He has tap, add black or green to your mana pool. Okay, he fixes you a little bit. But what's amazing about him in this deck is he also has a separate ability. Tap, put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. Wow. And a free engine that just puts card in your graveyard. I mean, there's similar cards like Perpetual Timepiece to this, but that's not in this deck, mainly because I wanted to try Skull Prophet instead, and I think he is just overall sweet card. Espen, do you have any take on this card? Now that you've seen it?
I really like.
Oops, sorry about that. I literally just cut it away from you.
It's okay, it's fine. But this card is really cool. I used to play another graveyard deck, and I played the Timepiece, as you mentioned earlier. But this is really cool because it also generates mana. It's a body for blocking, so it's like that but better. I think it's really cool. It is a spicy thing, a cool little human druid dude. I kind of like the art on it too. I'm not gonna lie, kind of like it. It's pretty sweet.
Yeah, Skull Prophet is overall just a sweet card. And sorry, we'll have to edit out that little mishap we just had there. I clicked the wrong cut to button and it cut to something else. But nonetheless, so Espen, This section is something that I think you really like doing, and that you run a plethora of in all of your decks. And this section is just
Hmm.
the removal. So, some of these you might expect. One is a little bit more you probably wouldn't play in most decks, but it's pretty decent in this deck. And Espen, I'll let you take it away. So, what are some of the removal in this deck?
So one of a removal that's great across most formats, or every format, I would say that it's able to be played in, is Path to Exile. For 1 white for instant, exile target creature, plain and simple. And then its controller may search his or her library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield tap, and then shuffle his or her library. So since some things can get indestructible sometimes, it's a great answer. And also 1 mana to get rid of your opponent's like 10 mana creature or something, or big thing. It hurts really bad for them, but it feels really good when you do it. And its brother or sister, what you would like to call it, is Swords to Plowshares. Another, again, 1 white mana for an instant, exile target creature, but now its controller gains life equal to the power. So, really cool card. Instead of gaining them a land, it gains them some life. Sometimes it matters a lot, or something that I have done in the past, I'd have a big creature, I would be about to die to a big burn spell in Commander. It happens. You all know it. And I ended up using Swords of Plowshare, my own thing. So it's really good versatile, especially since we're playing a lot of big creatures. If we need that extra life, might as well use
Absolutely.
it if it's going to die. And one of the newer ones past year, it's been printed. I really like it though. Is D-Spark for a white and a black instant. Exile target permanent with converted mana cost 4 or greater. Now, you might be thinking, well, 4 or greater is it missed a lot of stuff that are 1, 2, 3, but at the same time, it hits a lot of big stuff that we want to get out of our way since we're trying to punch through. So they have like some big creature. I just despark it and then go in and beat face with Kathril. So I
And
really like that card.
and what's especially nice about D-Spark is that it hits permanents, not just the creatures. So if there's like a
Yeah.
troublesome enchantment or a troublesome artifact on the board, and it's good because exile. So it's you might have a Darksteel Forge or something out. Well, I can just take care of that. Your Mycosynth Lattice, I'll just take care of that. Like very, very good utility card. But so moving on, this section I just called my favorite cards. Now all of these cards in this deck are just cards that in general I think are cool or that I really like. So the first one is probably another staple for all graveyard decks, and that's Reanimate. For a black, you put a creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control, and you lose life equal to its converted mana cost. So you have a lot of targets in this deck. I mean, you have Sigarda, you have Avacyn. Like, you're going to lose some life, but imagine entombing turn 1 in Avacyn, then turn 2 reanimating it. You now have a huge 8/8 beater with. I mean, you're not going to do that with this deck, but if you did, if someone went on that, if you had to go on the aggressive game plan, now you have this massive 8/8 beater. And I mentioned Zatalpa being a target for something. Well, this is a good target for Zatalpa too. Go on. You have something you want to add?
Oh no, I was just saying that like that is what's great about throwing in some of those bigger creatures sometimes is that you can throw in these big creatures and with reanimate you can just like yeah, and you can even like kind of politic your way where like you bend something and like we have to get it out of your graveyard and you tell them don't worry it's not going to come at you for a little while and then you have a reanimate spell in hand and you're like ah just kidding and, and they get them
It's
like that.
it's a pretty cute spell to say the least, with really cool artwork. But
Definitely.
going on, this card. Now, this card is probably the worst card in my deck, but my love for where this card got its start from is too great to not play it, and because it has a boggle in the art. This is Slippery Bogbonder. So for 3 colorless and a green, it has Flash. It also has Hexproof. And then it says, when Slippery Bogbonder enters the battlefield, put a hexproof counter on target creature, then move any number of counters from among creatures you control onto that creature. She's also a 3/3. What can I say? For 4 mana, you give something hexproof and you can move any number of counters to it? Wow. This card
It's pretty
is
sweet.
it's pretty sweet. I say it's bad because it's very situational, but sometimes situational spells are some of the best spells in your deck. I mean,
More or
again,
less, at least the least it is a protection spell.
exactly.
So, and
And
protection spells is always great.
and it also has protection for itself, like innately. So, I mean,
Mhm.
if it happens to get in your graveyard, now you have the hexproof keyword. So this next card is my second favorite card in the deck, and it's a card you may not expect. So this is Obscuring Haze. For 2 colorless and a green, it's an instant. So it reads, if you control a commander, you may cast a spell without paying its mana cost. So a free spell with your commander in a deck that wants its commander badly. Already good. It also reads, prevent all damage that would be dealt this turn by creatures your opponent controls. This card is a sick combat trick because it says that creatures your opponents control don't deal damage. Your Kathril still deals damage. Everything else you have that blocked still deals damage.
That
Overall,
feels really good.
a free it's a free fog, and it's even better than fog most of the time. Of course, paying 2 colorless and a green, or 2 generic and a green for a fog isn't the best, but you're playing a deck that's going to get its commander out fairly early. This card is absolutely sweet. And so finally, my favorite card in the deck, and probably my favorite card from the cycle now. This card is Eerie Ultimatum. For 2 white, 3 black, and 2 green, it's sorcery. It reads, return any number of permanent cards with different names from your graveyard to the battlefield. Imagine Reanimate souped up and for every single permanent in your graveyard. This card is absolutely sweet, and it's a sick card. I've resolved it multiple times, and for 7 mana, I've been able to grab Avacyn, Sigarda, maybe a couple lands, like a bunch of relevant stuff I can just grab because it's a number of permanent. Espen, do you have any take on the card?
The card is really cool, and I was actually just thinking of something when you do bring everything out. Say you have Sigarda and what was the other card that gives all your creatures extra Shalai? Say you have those 2 in there. You bring everything out except the Sigarda, and then all your things have hexproof, especially if Cathril's in the graveyard. You bring them all back, and then essentially you just go, oh yeah, all my things have hexproof, which is really cool. Since it says any number, you can that's another kind of line of play you can figure out around. Just really sweet how the commander fits with that very well.
Absolutely. I mean, Eerie Ultimatum is absolutely a sick card. So, moving on, we're trying to cut these episodes short, and we're at about the 30-minute mark, so we're almost done. We're almost done, Espen, with our first new episode. Can you believe that?
Woo,
so,
there.
The final thing is another thing that when I think of Espen, I think of this with Espen, and that's utility lands. So what are some of the utility lands in this deck?
So the first one is Gavany Township. It's a land, of course. Tap, add 1 generic mana to your mana pool. Okay, it's bad. No. It also has 2 generic mana, green and a white. Tap it, put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. So it's another Shalai ability, except for cheaper. Really awesome when you're just passing turns. Say you don't have much to do, you can just sink it into there, roll your guys. It's a great card to have, especially in late game. You're trying to go through people and get your guys bigger. And this next card, today's the first time I've seen it. And at first I was like, oh, this is amazing. It's busted. And then I read the last line. I was like, aw, I got a little sick. But besides the point,
Still
it
good.
is Nesting Grounds. It's a land. Yeah, it is still good. It's a land, tap for colorless. Okay. And then for one generic mana and tapping it, move a counter from target permanent you control onto another target permanent. Activate this ability only anytime you can cast a sorcery. You only do it at sorcery speed, but it's still really good. Say one turn you're like, well, I can plan for my biggest creature to have trample this turn. Then you can move a trample counter, or you can move X-Proof, Lifelink, Indestructible, any counter, and it's insane. And not just those counters, but say 1/1 counters too. Still a counter, of course, You can move those around. And it's just a really cool card, especially in this deck that cares about counters. What was your first take on this card, Christian?
So overall, I thought this card was super sweet. It comes in the Kathril Precon, so it's one of those cards that, activating as a sorcery, it's kind of inconvenient, but you take what you can get, and just the ability, I mean, that's pretty powerful just to have the ability to move a counter from Kathril to another creature. I mean, sure, you can't make stuff bad, but overall, it's good utility for this deck. And so, what's the final land that we're going to talk about?
The final land is Bonder's Enclave, and it's a land again, tapped, add a colorless, and then for 3 generic mana and tapping it, draw a card. Activate this ability only if you control a creature with power 4 greater. And generally, since we are a big creature deck more or less with the counters and the 1/1 counters and whatnot, I feel like this is very easy to pull off. Again, late in the game, you can't punch through. It's some late game card advantage, which is always good. We love late game card advantage, especially if we're trying to get in the last couple bits of damage with our big creatures.
Absolutely. Bonner's Enclave, absolutely sweet land. And what's nice is when Kathril comes down, if he's putting at least one keyword, you're getting at least 1+1/+1 counter on Kathril, and he already meets the requirement for 4 greater. So, this deck overall, and just to give some final thoughts on the deck, this build is very all in. Like, you're aggressively dumping stuff in the graveyard. You're not playing very reactive to their graveyard removal. And I highly suggest, if you're building this deck, to please consider consider your meta. If there's a lot of graveyard hate in your meta, adjust my list to what fits your group better. There's no one list fits all for Commander anyways. But if your group is lacking graveyard hate, this could be a great deck to take advantage of what they're lacking. And as a great deck to really put a lot of pressure. The biggest problem I have with this deck is I hate killing one player at a time. I'm a CEDH and a combo player by heart. I like killing everybody at the same time or doing enough damage all around where everyone dies. So I always have a little bit of a heart attack when I'm trying to pick between, so I always just resort to what is the smartest kill, who is the most threatening, just go through your routine, and that's how I decide at least. So what are your final thoughts on the deck?
First off, I just want to say how I decide. Just leave it to a die roll. Basic D6 and see what happens. It's always kind of funny to see what happens, more or less, and then you're just like, oh well. But overall, this deck, super sweet, super fun deck. I love the creatures. I love the commander and the synergies between some of the cards. It's really cool and really sweet. And overall, this is a fun deck that I would play with my friends. It is powerful, but not super powerful. It can be stopped. But you have some protection with some hexproof and indestructible. So I really love the deck. It's really sweet.
So, to end off this episode, we're going to cut to our closing card that we just made. And so as you'll see our social medias. So to follow me, I am at HexmasterReal. I don't know if Twitter is case sensitive, but just in case it is, it's capital H, capital M, and capital R for the beginning of each of the word. So Espen, to follow Espen, he's at ESPN_1926, all lowercase for him. And to follow the channel on Twitter, it's at Real Brass Gaming. Real has a capital R, Brass has a capital B, Gaming has a capital G. And so, for a new start, I hate to say goodbye, but unfortunately we got more episodes to record and a lot more stuff to do with our day. So, for the Brass Gaming Podcast, I'm Christian.
I'm Espen.
And we'll see you later. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, we can't say that together anymore. It sucks.